what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 9th, 2018, start of a brand new week. And boy, is there a lot of stuff going on right now. I was just looking at the stock market. It was soaring all day long. And all of a sudden, those last few minutes, just back off a cliff. The Dow finished 50 in the green. But that's got to be rattling a lot of people because it had been up closer to 300 just a couple of hours ago. All right, we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. We have a lot of stuff to get through today, so if you have something important to share, feel free to call on in, but don't just call on in to hear yourself on the radio because otherwise I'll just turn the phone lines off here. Obviously, over the weekend, the big news, there was another claimed chemical weapon attack against the innocent civilians of Syria, and the White Helmets came out with this video showing all these darling, cute little children being hosed down by emergency workers, none of whom were wearing any kind of protective gear other than face masks. And once again, how many times can they go to that well? Nobody's buying this. It's clearly another false flag, and the U.S. is just trying to say, ooh, chemical weapons attack, the war is on. Again, they're accusing Russia and Syria and Iran of jointly being behind all of this. There's been no investigation whatsoever other than by the Syrian Red Crescent and the Red Cross, and they can't find any evidence the attack actually happened. But that's not going to deter Donald Trump. He's fully on board with the war script. He's going to make a major decision on Syria by the end of the day and says Assad is going to pay a price. So the war talk is out there, and boy, you have to wonder about just how dumb Assad would be. Trump was only a week ago talking about pulling out of Syria, and here Assad goes and does the one thing that guarantees the U.S. will come back on in. Now, General Keane is out there saying that the U.S. should take out the entire Assad air power infrastructure, and that, of course, risks a direct confrontation with Russia. I don't think anybody wants that. But right now, the Syrian and Russian air forces are on highest possible alert following this development. They understand this is just pure warmongering. The Pentagon is preparing several options for military action in Syria. The only thing we know for a fact that's being done is that the U.S. Donald Cook, which is a guided missile destroyer, is in a position to send its missiles into Syria. The USS Laboon, which is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, is also in close proximity, as is the submarine, the USS Georgia. Meanwhile, a British aerial refueling plane seems to be flying up and down over the coast. Now, this looks like a repeat of what happened a year ago, massive cruise missile attack into Syria. And in all probability, they're going to go after Assad. They're going to do a decap strike on Damascus itself and try and get Assad. And all of it, of course, on the basis of a complete lie, like they have done so many times. Now, there's a UN meeting going on right now, and Russia's up there saying this is all completely fabricated, it's completely bogus, and any military action based on invented and fabricated excuses could lead to severe consequences. So Russia is sending a message. They're not buying this. They've been the victim of bogus allegations themselves with that Skripal case. And apparently Russia did send their chemical weapons experts into this location, Duoma, and they're saying they didn't find anything. The only people who claimed to know that this attack took place was the White Helmets, which are funded by the U.S. and Great Britain. They're known to associate with the terrorists, and they have been caught in the past fabricating so-called evidence of so-called gas attacks on civilians. We posted one of them to whatreallyhappened.com where the camera is panning down the faces of all these tragically dead children killed by that evil Bashar al-Assad, and then the camera backs up and one of the kids is peeking out to see if the camera is gone. Now let's remember that in the past there have been these huge embarrassments. There was that time that Mattis admitted there was no evidence Assad used to poison gas on his own people, and there's no reason for him to. He doesn't get anything for it. This claim of a gas attack on the civilians of Syria, well, it certainly helps Boris Johnson get past the Skripal case. It helps Israel get past what they're doing to the people of Gaza. How does it benefit Assad? And the answer is it doesn't. And you have to just keep asking, why would Assad, on the verge of winning the war, use chemical weapons, knowing it would open the door to the invasion the neocon war hawks want? And if Assad were dumb enough to use chemical weapons, why use them on civilians instead of the enemy? The story makes no sense at all. And everybody's basically coming on out and saying pretty much the same thing. Story out of Blacklisted News. What an amazing coincidence. Every time the U.S. threatens to pull out of Syria, Assad uses chemical weapons. It's like he doesn't really want us to go, even though obviously the rhetoric is to the contrary. Story out of Information Clearinghouse, another fake gas attack. And they're saying the same thing. Every time the U.S. starts to pull out from the war in Syria, the Syrian government is responding with a chemical attack that pulls the U.S. back in. Obviously, it's not the Syrian government. False flags don't get any more obvious than this one right now. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about this obvious false flag chemical attack over the weekend. It might not even have happened at all, as far as anybody can tell. But the U.S. military is moving forward. They're getting ready for an attack on Syria, which is probably going to bring us into direct conflict with the Russians. Another story out of Russia today. It would be stupid for Assad to commit a war crime amid his landslide victories. And that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. Look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a reason for Assad to do something that's stupid. He's on the verge of victory. He's on the verge of kicking the U.S. out of Syria. The last thing in the world he would do is any kind of a chemical weapon attack. Another story coming out of Russia today. Journalists question the Duoma chemical attack, precisely because it happened just as Trump was starting to talk about getting on out. So let's do some flashbacks. Flashback April 6th. Russian top brass warns al-Nusra, Free Syria Army, plotting chemical attacks in Syria. Flashback March 13. U.S. planning missile and bombing raid against Damascus. They're going to be the target for this next one. Flashback March 20th, 2018. U.S. planning a terrorist false flag chemical attack to justify bombing Syria. Russia says it will respond. And all the way back in October of 2017, last year, the U.S. admitted the Syrian rebels were using chemical weapons. So January of this year, the Syrian army finds Israeli-made mines and chemicals in eastern Dar al-Zawar. Flashback the 5th of April. Syrian army reportedly finds NATO and Israeli-made weapons in Daesh arsenal. Flashback March 12th. Syria finds chemical weapons workshop in Ghouta. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Apparently the Syrian army advance was so rapid they weren't able to completely evacuate that chemical weapons workshop. And the latest word is that Syria captured chemical weapons officers. And they're getting ready to parade them on the world stage in response to this. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind, Mike? If I was Putin, I'd be setting my ships and subs to sea. Because, like I said before, they're not letting this go. They're escalating.
Yep.
And this is bringing us to a world war, Mike. I mean, you heard this before. Worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis. It is. You know? Hey, Mike, you know what's funny? Actually, it's not funny, but why would Assad use gas? We all know he got rid of his weapons, but he's letting these militants leave on the buses.
Yes.
Why wouldn't they just kill them all? You know, why would he gas his own people while he's letting the militants away on the buses? Yeah, it's bull. I don't want to say on there.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of crap.
It is. It's complete and total nonsense. And Nikki Haley is up there telling the UN, we have got to stop this brutal treatment by the evil Assad. He's killing his own people. And the UN is doing nothing. Well, that's because the United Nations is too smart to fall for this nonsense after all the other times that the U.S. has gone up there and lied. Remember Colin Powell and his little vial of talcum powder? You know, screaming about Iraq's nuclear weapons and biological weapons and chemical weapons, none of which were ever found after they'd smashed Iraq to pieces. This is just more of the same. They're just replaying Iraq all over again, and the UN's attitude is fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. They're not buying this. Nobody's buying this.
Mike, the United Nations is a Western tool, just like the IMF and stuff. It's all part, it's all part of this Five Eyes group, the Anglo sphere of influence. We're headed to war, Mike. I don't want to scare you, but I mean, this is where we're going, because the Russians said if the missiles fire, they're going to target the missiles and the launchers where they came from. Well, the launchers mean from planes, ships, and subs. That's the launchers. That's where they originally came from. So, I mean, attack on Damascus is an attack on the Russians, Mike. That's it.
Yeah, it is. There are Russian nationals in Damascus right now. I find it very ironic that they bothered sending the Donald Cook to the shores of Syria, given that it was the Donald Cook that was totally paralyzed by Russia's electronic warfare up in the Black Sea.
Yeah, Mike, I don't like it because it's just escalating to the point where they're not, the West, Mike, I just watched the Netherlands and the U.S., they're not letting this go. They're escalating. There's only so much you can keep poking the bear. And when he strikes, Mike, the world's going to feel it. And I just have this crazy feeling. We haven't been here before, Mike. We just haven't been in history like this, Mike. It's scary. That's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good show, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We certainly haven't been here in our lifetimes. Obviously, in the run-up to big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2, people were feeling the way that we're feeling right now. But this is new in our experience because the vast majority of us were born after World War II was all over. Let's grab another phone call. Dee in Minnesota, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike, Syria. Well, first of all, I got 2 kids. I think I know when I'm being lied to. I'm sorry, but are these people not smarter than a 5th grader? Even my daughter, who's in 5th grade, knows better than to try and lie twice about the same subject.
Well, this isn't so much lying as it is diplomacy. I don't think the U.S. government thinks that the American people are believing this. If you go out on Twitter and social media and the comment boards on all these articles, nobody is buying this at all. But the attitude of the government is, this is our official position and we're going to act on it, and there's nothing that you can do about it because the elections are all rigged anyway.
Well, and Russia had said like a month or so ago that the rebels were going to do this, and this goes back to late 2011, 2012. You remember those experiments?
Yeah, I remember.
With the rabbits, and they bragged about it. So yeah, we know who did this. And I guess last year and 2013, those were pretty scary times.
Yes.
I don't know if they're just gonna, like they did last year, Russia might not get involved, but because Israel just struck them too this morning.
Yes. Yes, we're going to talk
so
about
I don't know. And I mean, if they do something like that, Russia probably won't. But if they do something like try to do a decapitation, they're going to start a goddamn world war. There's no other way to put it. I don't know how else to phrase it, but that's what's going to happen because Russia's already said it's the last thing you're going to do.
Yeah, Russia has already promised they will respond if the U.S. attacks Syria. So yeah, this is it. This is we're on the verge. This is as real as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as scary as that in 2013, just before Russia brokered that ceasefire deal. And I can remember saying then, everybody's like, Putin's so great. He did a wonderful peace thing. I said, guys, watch out. They bide their time. They'll strike eventually.
Yeah.
I hope Assad has got a mutual defense treaty with Russia. Otherwise, he's screwed.
I don't know if there's actually a formal treaty, but I think Russia needs to understand, or probably does understand, that if there's going to be a war with the United States, they'd rather have it on Syrian soil than their own. Russians remember just how close to Moscow Hitler got, and they're never going to let that happen again.
No, but if it goes nuclear, it won't matter how. I mean, that's just going to be a moot point. It's over.
Yeah, if it goes nuclear.
If it goes nuclear.
If it goes nuclear.
Which,
All right.
considering we're out of money and men, we can't win it. What do we got to back up a war with? Debt. We don't even manufacture the weapons.
We don't manufacture good weapons. Yeah, our stockpiles are drawn down. You can't run a war on debt. I mean, the bankers love it when you borrow to go to war, but we're already so deeply in debt. Even if the U.S. were to win this war, they're still not going to be able to get out of debt. I mean, that's how insane this whole situation is.
And we'll be paying, and my kids and grandkids and their grandkids will be paying for it forever. And if it gets too hot, I've got a son that's 19 and I've got a brother that's 24. I don't want either one of them dying for Israel's interests. No, I don't.
Well, make sure they know how to type. If they know how to type, they'll never see the front lines.
Well, I know my son does, and my brother's in the Navy, so...
Okay.
But that won't matter. If it gets hot and ships start going down, that's a scary prospect.
Yeah, especially considering how poorly some of these ships are being navigated, as we saw here in the Pacific a little while ago. All right, well, listen.
Yeah, you have a good day. I'll let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take another phone call from George in Texas, and then I got to get back to the news because there is so much. George, what's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike? One thing I am certainly, my son's going to be 18 in less than a month, and guess what? As a result of this, these wars, I'm not going to register him for selective service. And I think every parent should do that. If they don't want their kids going to war, don't register for selective service. I don't want government having pickings at them.
Yeah, well, that can result in serious legal consequences for your son. It's basically, and by the way, people need to remember the 13th Amendment, the one against involuntary servitude. The draft is a complete violation of that. The Constitution says you're not supposed to be able to just grab the people and tell them what to do. And that's exactly what a draft does.
Well, the thing is, it's more like, on the post office, they said, register for the selective service. It's the law. No, it's an executive order. It's not a law. It's an executive order. People don't realize that. But anyway, talking to one of my friends that lives in Lebanon, he sat there and says every time Benjamin Netanyahu gets his back against the wall against corruption charges, something like a bombing in Syria happens, or this happens,
or the attack along the border with Gaza. Right now, the atrocity, the Passover massacre has driven Netanyahu's corruption out of the news cycle.
And that's a man I think that really needs to be arrested.
Well, there's never a good asteroid around when you need one. All right, George, we're going to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines because I've got a lot of stuff to get through today. So, John in Tennessee, aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, very quick. When Trump said he was going to move the troops out of Syria, CNN even sent out a tweet saying if Trump pulls out the troops from Syria, Assad and Putin and Iran win. Okay, so CNN is just like Fox News with the war rhetoric. And then Lindsey Graham and John McCain's comment about this chemical attack, basically the message to Trump was either you do something about this or the Republican Party will be the one impeaching you for national security reasons. So that's it. So Trump he's at a fork in the road. Either you go with the 18,000 indictments against the deep state or you kick off World War III. We're all watching.
Well, I understand that. And, it's obvious that Trump is not in control. And that's a very dangerous situation. The bureaucracy is in control, and the bureaucracy are not elected to be in charge of this country.
Well, my suspicion is he isn't going to do anything about it. They're backing him in the corner because everybody in Washington, D.C. wants him out. Everybody, both the left and the right, they want him gone.
Well, Trump is fully on board. He's out there making speeches and screaming about where, Assad will pay a price. Anyway, John, we're going to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with more news after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And once again, we really do need your help. This is as real as it gets. We are really on the verge of a world war. We're really on the verge of seeing Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com go under. This is not a TV show. It's not the X-Files. This is reality, and we need your help. Now, the postal address where you can send a check, money order, pardon me, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can become a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And of course, over at whatreallyhappened.com, we have our big, flashing donate button over there on the right-hand side. Now, the Jerusalem Post is reporting that Israeli officials are urging a U.S. strike in Syria. Just like they urged the U.S. attack on Iraq. They're out there in their little cheerleading outfits and going, go bomb, go bomb, go bomb. And basically, Israel is telling their own people that Assad is going to launch chemical weapons attacks against Israel if America doesn't act immediately. So it's just pure fear-mongering, war-mongering. But it's rather interesting. I got a rather interesting email from somebody who's been going through all the different social media, including Trump's diehard supporters. And everyone is saying, this is an obvious false flag to start a war. In fact, somebody is saying Duma is Arabic for Reichstag fire. Now, when the report first came out about the chemical weapon attack, the news was out there, oh, it's women, it's children, feel sorry for them. It's a shock value. They're pushing it as hard as they can, and saying that those who survived the attack were being treated at hospitals around the area. Well, apparently those hospitals have issued a statement saying they have not seen any patients with any symptoms of chemical poisoning. They're just not there. Anyways, I mentioned before, apparently the Syrian government got coalition chemical weapons officers when they took that chemical weapon factory near Ghouta. They got there so fast the staff couldn't evacuate. And apparently they're getting information for them as to what is going on. Now, as you know, Israel likes to throw their weight around, and over in Israel, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman is saying that U.S. President Donald Trump did not ask for Israel's view before announcing his planned withdrawal of American troops from Syria, which is another reminder who's really in charge of U.S. foreign policy. And it's easy for them. It's not their money. It's not their children. Very worrying story out of Russia Insider. Mattis won't rule out starting World War III over this nonsense Syria chemical attack. And they're basically talking about airstrikes, supposedly over this non-existent chemical weapon attack. If there was an attack, it wasn't by Assad. It simply does not make sense. Everybody benefits except Assad. Britain moves past the Skripal scandal. Israel gets to dodge condemnation for their killing of Palestinians along the border. Trump gets his war to distract from the economy. The only person that doesn't get anything from this is Bashar al-Assad. It's ramping up the war again at the point where he was almost victorious. Basically, to believe that Assad did this, you have to believe that he wanted to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. And that makes no sense whatsoever. Now, there's been an airstrike on the T4 airbase near Homs. Originally, people were saying it might be the United States responding to the chemical weapons attack. It turns out it was Israel. Israel launched their F-15s over Lebanese airspace without the permission of Lebanon, I might add, and fired missiles at this T4 airbase. And the Israeli government is still refusing to really discuss it. Their attitude is, maybe we did and maybe we didn't. We don't need to tell you. But apparently Iranians at that base have been killed in the airstrike, and that is going to ramp up the tensions even further. Now, when first asked about the airstrikes, the Pentagon denied any knowledge of it, but it turns out that too was a lie. Over at Blacklisted News, it's come on out that Israel did inform the U.S. government about plans to attack the Syrian airbase. So, yeah, the war is on, the new invasion, yet another invasion of Syria, all on the basis of a complete lie. And it is such an obvious and heavy-handed lie. At this point, it's almost like the U.S. government doesn't really care what you think about them. After all, the elections are rigged. It's not like they have any reason to be afraid of you. So their attitude is, this is our official position, Assad did it, and we are going to conduct our policy accordingly, and everybody knows it. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about this very obvious false flag in Syria, and the U.S. is just moving forward on it. There's absolutely no proof it actually happened. The only report is from the White Helmets, a group that is known to have lied about these things before. They're funded by the United States and Great Britain. They're allied with the U.S.-supported terrorist groups. There's no provenance at all. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Russia has sent their chemical weapons experts to the area. They can find no trace of any chemical weapons have been used. The original news report said survivors of the attack had gone to the local hospitals. The hospitals are saying, no, nobody with any chemical weapon symptoms has shown up. It's a complete lie, just like other lies that have been used to trick this nation into war. Spanish mine in Havana Harbor didn't exist. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin didn't exist. Lusitania was, in fact, smuggling weapons to Great Britain when she was sunk. Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. Saddam did not have nuclear weapons. How many more times are you going to allow yourself to be lied into supporting a war? It's your money, and more to the point, it's your children at risk. You think these war hawks are spending any of their own money on this? You think they're going to let their children on those front lines? Of course not. The days when leaders led their own troops into battle, those are long gone. Now, stories coming out of Masdar News, you know, all these ISIS jihadis who have left Ghouta and these other areas under these humanitarian deals with the Assad government. Apparently, the U.S. is retraining them and renaming them democratic forces. Now, in just 24 hours, Turkey has managed to station troops on top of 8 mountains in the Kurdistan region. They have captured the high ground. So that is getting ready to really cut loose. Now, as you know, Nikki Haley up at the United Nations has telegraphed that Donald Trump is going to refuse to certify the P5+1 deal, and he's going to unilaterally withdraw from it. The European nations think the P5+1 is just great. The IAEA is confirming that Iran is fully in compliance with the requirements of that treaty, but Donald Trump wants it to go. He wants a new treaty that would strip Iran of its long-range ballistic missiles. They're disarming Iran for the same reason they want to disarm you. So it's easier to get you to do what they want you to do. Now, the head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Ali Akbar Salahi, is saying that his organization still has the capability to restore 20% uranium enrichment at its Fordo nuclear facility in just 4 days' time if the 2015 nuclear deal is discarded by the other side. Now, this is very tough talk, but in the end, it's rather impotent, because 20% enriched uranium is too powerful for nuclear power stations and nowhere near strong enough for a nuclear warhead. But I think he's implying that if they were to run that same uranium through Fordo a few more times, they could get it to the point of producing a weapons-grade uranium. And I imagine that, Iran is going to be working on that just as hard as they can. I'm expecting that as soon as Trump pulls out of the P5+1, we may see Israel bomb the facility at Fordo, the way Israel bombed Iraq's civilian nuclear power plant at Osirak, claiming there was a bomb factory in the basement, which turned out to be another lie. All right, let's take a phone call. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I tell you what, I woke up pretty upset this morning watching all this thing unfold, and I agree with you. It is a false flag. It makes no sense why Bashar al-Assad would do such a thing. So we know it's a lie. But the Pentagon is deciding, I would assume, that they have to figure out, fabricate, manufacture something to keep them in Syria, and that's what this is all about. They've always said before, they've lied twice about the chemical attacks, and then they later on claimed, well, okay, we still want him out anyway. So you got to look at the motive behind why they pulled this one off. They want to stay in Syria, but I was going to say that it's too bad that Barron Trump is not of age. I'd like to see him around 18 to 20 years old, because Donald Trump would not be pushing these buttons, pushing for a war, a conflict with these countries, or he'd have a hard time defending why he would not send his own son, kind of like the Dick Cheney deferments, why they decided not to go to Vietnam. This is a false flag. We need to push very hard back. Matter of fact, I talked to John Stadler this morning, and Ron McDonald and I are going to hit this really hard tonight on his show. This is they're pulling that old thing again, what they did before. It worked before, the lies and the deceit, and we know for a fact that this was a false flag because the United States has played judge, jury, and executioner. They have offered no proof, absolutely no proof, to back up their claims that Assad did this. Now, the easiest thing would be to do is provide some proof and show it. They jumped right over that and said, forget the proof. We don't need to show proof. This is how you know you're being lied to, when they don't show you any proof whatsoever. They're not even claiming faulty intelligence. They've already forgot that. Forget the intelligence. We're just going to say it, and if we say it, it must be true. It's proof. The new proof is an accusation or an allegation. They're new proof.
That's their new proof. And not only that, they're attacking anybody who says, let's see the evidence. And apparently over in Great Britain, a Tory minister has gone on the attack against Jeremy Corbyn for saying we need to have some evidence before we move forward. And you're in dangerous territory where the official U.S. government or the official government response to a demand for evidence is you just sit down and shut up.
If there's some kind of military conflict and the Pentagon's handing some down to Donald Trump to carry out some actions, I'm sure they're military, Putin is going to respond. I think China will side with Russia, and I think North Korea will all side with each other. You'll have three countries that will be beating at the evil empire of the United States. This could get really ugly. We could be this is a no-win situation.
I agree.
We are making so many enemies out there.
Well, we're going to have Iran is going to be part of it. Which means Russia and China can forward base their assets much closer to the area of operation. It's just utterly insane. Unless that those missing trillions in the Pentagon went for something so black we couldn't see it, we can't win a conventional war against the combined forces of Iran, Russia, and China. We just can't. And
Agreed.
That's what guarantees there'll be a nuclear exchange.
Agreed. One last question for Mike. I know I'm going to condemn this on my show, and I know John's going to hit it hard tonight. He's very angry about this, so definitely tune into his show tonight. It should be very, very interesting. But, Mike, if they pull this thing off again like they did last time, the WMDs and their faulty intelligence, this time, like I said, they're not even using intelligence. They're just jumping the boat and saying, they did it, he did it, let's go after him. Mike, what's our next move as citizens of the United States? What is our next move? I've done the protests. I've done the rallies. I've marched to the Capitol. I've done all these things against George W. Bush, against that illegal war. What would we need to do, Mike? What do we need to do?
Well, I think the most important thing that we do right now is that we continue talking with everybody, it's not going to be difficult. I have not really encountered anybody other than the hardcore Hillary trolls who think that this happened. And right now, we need to send a message to the rest of the world that we, the people of the United States of America, are not buying any of this nonsense, and that we do not support our government, we do not support their wars. Unfortunately, with our completely crooked election system, we can't vote these people out. Again, I draw the line at encouraging any kind of a violent response. I don't think the American people are ready for any kind of an uprising or revolution against this government. So we're really in a very, very bad place here, but we just have to stop cooperating with this government. And just say, it's not my government anymore. It's illegal. It's illegitimate. They're guilty of war crimes. They've made a huge, huge mess of our country, and they're going to try and basically blow everything up because they can't think of anything else to do.
Yeah, I agree. You're doing a great job, Mike. Keep standing out there. We appreciate you. I do.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot, and I appreciate you and your show as well, and certainly that of John Stadmiller. Okay, we're going to let you go, take another call from Francis in North Carolina, and then get back to the news. Francis, what's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both. 2 quick points for you in light of what I've been hearing so far, and I appreciate your indulgence. One, as far as greed is concerned, it basically uses so-called diplomacy as a crutch. No matter how they want to use it, it will be done. As far as this whole fiasco goes with the false flag deal goes. Secondly, the second point is, as far as our young folks are concerned, going in the military, supposedly for patriotic reasons and so forth, my thoughts for the adults of these young people are, don't let them go. Don't send them. Let them do something else, but don't do it. Don't send them off. I mean, if you treasure your offspring, your sons and daughters, then let them do something else that's helpful and healing to the U.S., not bloodshed and not offer themselves to be a guinea pig for their own biotechnical warfare they're also doing in the military as well, to be sent over to another country. It's absurd and pointless. Later.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines again. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. My idea is in 6 days, what is it we're supposed to do in 6 days?
Enlighten me.
That would be April 15th? April 15th?
Yes.
Don't pay taxes.
I'm hearing that from a lot of people. The problem is the government's just going to borrow the money anyway. And by the way, it's spiraling completely out of control. They're predicting that the U.S. government's deficit, not debt, the deficit will reach $1 trillion a year by 2020.
Okay, well, anyway, that's okay. It's not going to hurt them. They're going to have their war anyway. But the people are going to be suffering for money. We're already suffering for money. So at least keep these few dollars you got in your pocket to when there's no more money. I heard something really scary. I heard that in India they're starting, if you want to buy food, now I'm talking food, if you want to buy food, you have to give your fingerprint and they're going to scan the irises of your eyes. And
Boy,
you know how they often...
Well, that tells us they're getting concerned about hoarding.
Yeah, and they often try things in India to see how it's going to float.
Yes.
And I know a story about last year, the Anarchapulco conference. One of the people that was going down there, Jeremy Tucker, I think it was. He got on a flight to fly to Mexico, and he'd gone through all the checkpoints, did everything, and he was on the ramp going down to the plane. They stopped him one more time and wanted to scan his irises of his eyes, and he, yes. I mean, he let him do it. He was, how you are when you're in the airport and you're trying to get somewhere, and so he didn't want to make a big flap, but they scanned his irises. And what I would like to point out is he wasn't coming into the country, he was going out.
Yes, they've started doing that. TSA is now checking people leaving the United States. I have no idea why. Obviously, Americans going abroad aren't carrying bombs or anything. They may be checking people for taking money out of the country. which a lot of people would like to get their wealth out of the country before the war gets going. And we know that if you go through any kind of a border check with too much money, they'll just take it under the civil forfeiture laws.
That's just plumb scary.
Yes, it is.
Well, that's all I got.
All right, Kathleen, thanks an awful lot. We're going to close the phone lines now. I need to get back to the news here. Over in Great Britain, the hospital is confirming that Sergei Skripal is no longer in critical conditioning. His health is improving rapidly. His daughter Yulia is doing quite a bit better as well. They're describing it as a miracle. It's a miracle. I mean, we all know that Novichok is just instantly deadly. It's a miracle they both survived. And of course, Twitter's having a field day with all of this, saying it's obvious that it was not Novichok. Now, supposedly, the CIA and MI6 are going to relocate the Skripals to America and give them new identities. I guess they don't want any independent journalists tracking them down and finding out what's going on. Meanwhile, the first head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons basically said you can't tell in just 24 hours what type of poison was used. And that's how quickly the story came on out. When they found the Skripals, passed out on that park bench, and they said, oh, it's Novichok, it's Russia's fault. Now, you need to go back and look at how the story mutated, because originally it was said that the Skripals were poisoned at this lunch place they had, Zizi's, which is a pizza and seafood restaurant. And the early report said other people were affected by this nerve gas. And then all of a sudden, did you notice how they changed it to, oh, the Novichok was on the doorknob of their home, and it took 7 hours after they left their home for the Novichok to kick in, which is not how Novichok works. The Daily Mail on March 6th reported the Skripals had a seafood risotto peche with king prawns, mussels, and squid rings. This is a dish with a well-known reputation as a source of shellfish poisoning. The Skripals were okay when they arrived, okay when they left. They passed out 40 minutes later on the bench with symptoms similar to a paralytic reaction from shellfish poisoning. Now, whoever put out the fugu out there was complete and utter nonsense, but shellfish poisoning is very common. And in the early reports about what happened, they said other people who had eaten at that same restaurant had come down ill. So it looks like the Skripals got a bad case of food poisoning, and somebody said, oh, let's find a way to blame this on Russia. And that's where it all came from. And now they're stuck with that lie. And so they've used another lie to distract from it. Oh, Assad gassed his own people. It's women and children. The U.S. is continuing to ramp up strikes in Somalia, killing more alleged militants. The U.S. insists absolutely no civilians have been killed. That's a rather hard thing to promise when you're using bombs. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Checking my email, I got a couple of emails from people reminding about how some weeks back, somebody leaked some photos showing that the White Helmets had set up a sound stage with which to make videos. And one of the emails is saying it looks like the same set that's seen in the background of the film that they just, or the video rather, they just released supposedly from this last weekend's chemical weapons attack. And again, if you look at that video, it's all focused on the little kids. There are no grown-up victims anywhere there. There's no indication the kids have had a chemical weapons attack. They're just hosing them off and apparently giving them shots from these asthma, the little breath thing that you inhale. And that's basically it. It's all fake. It's all phony. Now, getting on down to Israel, the tensions along the border with Gaza are continuing. There's a story out of Electronic Intifada calling on the world conscience and basically saying that we shouldn't allow events in other parts of the world, especially lies, distract us away from what Israel is doing to the Palestinians during this March for Land. And Human Rights Watch has been down there and said they have found no evidence of any credible threat to Israeli soldiers who are operating under this shoot-to-kill policy. And there was a video we put up at whatreallyhappened.com where the Israeli snipers are laughing after they shoot people. They think it's great sport. And not just the soldiers. Story out of Global Research in California. Israelis are going on down to that Gaza border to watch and cheer as the military uses live fire against the Palestinians. And they're just, they're just sitting there and watching what's going on here. And it just undermines the claim that what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is because the Israelis live in fear of the Palestinians trapped in the Gaza gulag or the Gaza ghetto, whichever one you want to call it. But that's exactly what it is. The Israelis think that's great sport. Now, in this last little go-around at the Gaza border, the Israeli snipers were shooting at Palestinian journalists. They wounded several, and they killed one of them. And these journalists were wearing body armor with press in very large letters on the front and back. And it's considered poor form to shoot at the journalists. The Israeli defense minister came on out and said, well, for all we know, it's a Palestinian terrorist disguised as a journalist, and we're not going to take any chances. So they're just shooting anybody they don't like, is what it comes on. Now, Israel hawks are basically saying, go ahead and attack Syria. Forget about Gaza. You know, the big news today is Syria. So even Israel is trying to use this latest false flag in Syria to distract from what they're doing to the people of Palestine. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with hour number 2 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And we've been talking about events in Israel, which we should not allow this false flag in Syria and the obvious impending war in that country to distract from evils elsewhere. And apparently a video has been leaked showing Israeli interrogators attempting to coerce confessions from Ahed Tamimi. Now, Ahed Tamimi, for those of you who don't remember, was a young lady who slapped an Israeli soldier who had just shot a member of her family. Didn't punch, didn't hit, didn't kick, just slapped. And they've arrested her, they've thrown her in jail. They're trying to justify the actions of the Israeli government in response to a slap. And apparently, according to this video, they're trying to coerce her into confessing to worse crimes so they can justify keeping her in prison. All right, we're going to go ahead and take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, we can just thank God that we've got the cool head of crisis management of John Bolton right now. You know, that we can just thank God that Sheldon Adelson put him there, you know, that, but at any rate, yeah, look, Mike, I'm calling about the border and the Gaza thing. And I wanted to point out one more time that any of the atrocities the Nazis were accused of committing, and there were atrocities, but maybe not the way that we've been told, but maybe even if they were, they occurred in Poland and, you know, out of sight of the German population to a Nazi government that was never really elected. But here we have this Gaza thing where they're killing thousands, they're shooting thousands. Literally, it's approaching 2,000 people have been maimed or crippled or whatever from this. The press in the United States barely talks about it. But if we're sitting around a table in Israel, in Haifa, Israel, let's say, and there's great-grandma and great-grandpa, and then there's grandma and grandpa, and then there's mom and dad, and then there's a 20-year-old and his sister. Great-grandma and grandpa were out there probably ethnic cleansing and raping and killing Palestinians back in 48, and then grandpa was probably doing it in 67, and then and grandma too, because it's a mass conscript army, and all the way down to mom and dad, and now the 20-year-olds out doing it too. It's a mass participation, like a war crime sport for these guys. They've all harassed people at checkpoints. They've all raped or shot or beaten people or humiliated them. The whole country has.
Yes.
And it's gone on for 70 years. 70 years. Everybody's bought on this. They keep getting elected and reelected, these same policies. So I think you can make a real justification that they're worse than the German people were during World War II.
I could see merit in that situation because while there was certainly a segment of the German population who went along with the Nazi agenda and so forth, the majority of German people knew something was wrong, but they stayed silent. It was called the good German philosophy, where I know my government is acting badly, but if I stay quiet and don't speak out, I will be safe. And of course, the end result of that was the German people lost their country. In the case of Israel, we see all these stories about there's almost this tourism industry that's springing up for Israelis to go on down to the border with Gaza and just sit there in their little lounge chairs with their coolers and watch the slaughter.
It's really come all in. They're all in on this. And it's been going on for 70 years. And at least, like in the end, Hitler couldn't even trust his army who wanted to overthrow him and wanted to, at least segments of it, tried to kill him and all that. The Israeli army's all in, it's an all citizen army. There's no SS in the Israeli army. They're all SS, So
yeah, it's an ugly situation. And unfortunately, it comes out of their religion that they're raised with, to think that they are superior to all other forms of human life on this planet. In fact, that the other life on this planet don't really qualify as human. They've been described as, beasts on two legs. And when you raise somebody with that kind of an attitude, you're going to create a population that is capable of immense brutality against others.
And Mike, when I've got to say again that we would not be in, clearly and absolutely unequivocally, would not be in Syria if the Israeli lobby and the American Jewish press had not gotten us in there. What in the world were we ever doing there except to back up the Israelis? Trump tries to pull out and gets a call from Netanyahu and John Bolton, and we're right back in again. And it's all because of them. We have not been following our own interests for a long, we're following their interests.
Yeah, we're under foreign puppet rule, and we should be no more accepting of it than the people of Iraq or the people of Afghanistan or the people of Yemen who tried to fight back. That's exactly what's going on. It's like that comment by Avigdor Lieberman about how Trump didn't check with us before he talked about pulling out of Syria, and just telegraphing who's really in control of our foreign policy.
And when he did check with him, he reneged. Netanyahu called him and scolded him over the phone, and John Bolton went in and slapped him on behalf of Sheldon Adelson and the generals also, and we're back in on them again. And here we are coming on World War III because these neocon Israeli firsters have gotten us intervening everywhere in the Middle East to fight Israel's war. Well,
I think their ultimate plan, I think Israel would like to find some way to goad the United States and Russia/China into a mutually destructive nuclear exchange, which would leave Israel with its nuclear arsenal basically in control of the entire Middle East, and through that oil revenue, basically in control of the world. And I remember when I first suggested that years ago, I got a lot of emails saying, oh, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. But that's the way it's actually shaping up. Israel is the silent player in all of this. And if World War III breaks out, Israel's just going to step on back and say, hey, we're not really part of this. And yet they're definitely one of the chief instigators.
Well, Mike, that doesn't seem like so far-fetched now at all. But how about the way the press treats this? This Gaza thing. Like it barely exists,
Yeah, the corporate media is acting like, this is all the Palestinians' fault, and, Israel's been forced to respond. No, Israel sent snipers down there before the march even got started. And what they want is for this march for the land to go away and never come back again, because it's another reminder that Israel never complied with the requirements placed on its United Nations membership, which included a Palestinian right of return.
Man, oh man, oh man, how we ever let ourselves into this, I swear.
We didn't let ourselves into it. Our politicians sold us into it. You know, once the limits on campaign donations came off, the U.S. Capitol became a one-stop shopping center for corruption, and Israel's always being given these special perks. They're not required to register as a foreign agent over at AIPAC. They have the run of the place. They absolutely do, and it's absolutely shameful.
It's going to be the death of us.
Yes, it will.
Really.
It will be, quite literally. And then Israel will just find another country to parasitize.
Oh, my God. Well, Mike, I hope I'm around and you're around for the call in tomorrow. But thank you for taking my call.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And one last story here before we go back to the phones. Apparently, the White House is issuing a statement that soccer fans should think twice about traveling to the World Cup in Russia because consular services have been threatened by the diplomatic crisis between Putin and the West. And, of course, the reason they're trying to attack the World Cup in Russia, they're claiming that Putin will exploit the World Cup in the way Hitler milked the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936. Well, Hitler didn't exactly milk the Olympic Games. You remember Jesse Owens? Absolutely destroyed Hitler's message of the superior Aryan race. All right, back to the phones here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Eerie times, buddy. But, I'm just thinking what could happen, a scenario if the U.S. and Russia start against each other now. Let's say that, let's say another missile launch, right?
Yes.
From a ship, from a U.S. ship, and Russia decides they're going to blast that ship out of the water. U.S. responds. And my opinion is the aircraft carriers and the other large ships that the U.S. has in the Mediterranean would have a lifespan of about 5 minutes before they'd be blown out of the water. They're sitting ducks. They're dinosaurs. They're really not, meant for the kind of warfare that would go on. Now, my question to you, if something like this happens, do you think the next step would be the U.S. then would start the nukes, or do you think maybe cooler heads would prevail? And as far as Israel goes, they start anything, all it takes is one bomb and they're gone. That's it for the whole country. So I don't know if they're that crazy that they would, if they think that they're going to get away with the U.S. and Russia destroying each other.
Well,
but anyway, but what do you think?
Regarding Israel, they wouldn't have to nuke the entire country. Basically, a tactical nuke on Tel Aviv, and that's going to be it, because all of that political corruption is in Tel Aviv, and that would be the target. As far as a possible scenario for what's going on, I suspect that Trump is going to launch another cruise missile attack, this time at Damascus. They're going to try and kill Bashar al-Assad. I'm sure that Assad is already headed for parts unknown. As to what extent Russia and Syria will come on in to try and thwart that attack, I don't know. But you're absolutely right. Both Syria and Russia have said they will respond by attacking the launch platforms. Now, in terms of aircraft, that's going to be very tricky. But certainly they could target those Aegis ships. They've already demonstrated they can knock them down. Maybe the Donald Cook is being set up to be a sacrificial lamb, knowing that it can't withstand an attack by the Russian electronic warfare aircraft. Maybe they're sending it in there to get sunk so that they can say, remember the Donald Cook, like they did with Remember the Maine. And have
How long
a
do you think those aircraft carriers?
I'm sorry?
Do you think those aircraft carriers? How long do you think the aircraft carriers we have in there would last? I mean, if they're sitting ducks.
It depends on how much of the new weaponry Russia has already forward deployed. But again, those carriers and their screens are hopelessly outdated. The U.S. has been spending trillions of dollars basically preparing to fight World War II all over again, whereas Russia and China have been focused on how World War III will be fought. And we've been hearing it from all these military commanders saying that our current defensive systems are not able to withstand the new generation of hypersonic attack missiles.
Meanwhile, I hope young people are getting the message and not joining the military. Let them try to institute a draft and see how far they're going to get with that, because I believe this would be the revolution. This would be the start of a revolution in this country.
That would wake everybody up. It was when they instituted the draft that public opposition to Vietnam really took off.
Well, actually, they had a draft before. They had a draft since World War II. I think there was a draft right up through Vietnam. But what happened is, at first, during the Vietnam War, they thought we're really defending against communism. We got to fight them here before we got to fight them over there. And then people started finding out what garbage this was. It was nonsense. And that's when the opposition started. And but now people are a lot smarter. People are, you got the internet, you got all kinds of alternate news, real news, not the garbage. I was driving all weekend this week because I had to go up to upstate New York for our grandson's first for his baptism, right?
Yep.
And on my way, so I was listening to a lot of these news stations driving between music and news, and I had the fake news network on Sirius XM, the Fox News, and they say like it's a fait accompli that he bombed, he gassed his own people just like he did before. These people are sick. They're evil. I think they're evil, not just sick. They're vile. They actually want war, and they keep on going with the stuff about Putin being evil. They're the ones. They want to see evil. All they got to do is look in the mirror. All these people got to do. Because they're going to get this. Most of these radio talk shows, by the way, what I'd call a mainstream radio talk, they're garbage. They're nothing but neocon garbage that that spews lies and warmongering, like Rush Limbaugh, Hannity, Mike Gallagher, and what's this guy Lynn Woolley? I remember from Texas.
Yes.
When I lived in Texas, they all they do is they perpetrate the garbage that that the deep state puts out, that the government puts out. They say, well, they're not. Oh, by the way, so is Breitbart. Breitbart is garbage. Breitbart is the biggest fakes going. Glenn Beck, another fake. I mean, these people are bad news. I don't know why people think Breitbart is alternate news. I mean, you talk about Zionists. They're about as Zionist as they come. I mean, you can't be more, especially since they got rid of Banning.
Yes.
And also, this guy Kareem, what was his name? Hakeem Hassam.
Yes.
A British guy. They seemingly got rid of him, and he was giving. The last time he had a show, he talked about what happened to Ukraine, the truth about what happened to Ukraine, the overthrow of legitimate government and all that. And I don't listen to it much. Every once in a while I'll turn it on, but I've heard from people who do listen to it religiously that they say he has not been on since. And I've looked at their website and I don't see him on there either. So obviously he rubbed, I think it's the Mercers who are funding Breitbart.
Yep.
Evidently he rubbed them the wrong way. And, this is the kind, but yet they have the gall to say they're alternate news. You're alternate news, Mike. InfoWars credit today, they came right out and said it. This is a false flag. Both David Knight and Owen Schroyer, who's a substituting for Jones this week, they came out and said this is a false flag. They're not, and they had guest hosts there from 3 to 4 also said it's a false flag. So I mean, they're still alternate news. I mean,
well,
and I think
the term independent news. Independent news, because alternative sort of has a negative cachet about it. Anyway, Mark, the phone lines are loading up, and I need to get these calls out of the way so I can get back to the news, because there's still a lot of stuff going on here. So let's switch over to John in Canada. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Long-time listener, and I stumbled across a little bit of a tidbit on the weekend that you may find funny. The Jerusalem Post was founded in 1932, and do you know what its original name was?
Please enlighten us.
Palestine Post.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
You'd get a tickle out of that, because I know, but all this denial about Palestine, I know you've mentioned this many times, all this denial about Palestine being a real country. and yet the number one, I guess, hardline newspaper in Israel was called originally the Palestine Post. I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, Golda Meir was the one who came on out and said there never was a Palestine or Palestinians. It's just made up by Jew haters and so forth. But there is so much evidence. Palestine's been there for thousands of years. It's on all the maps. People have actually sent me maps from the 1800s showing Palestine, Palestinian coins, Palestinian books, postcards, and everything. I was trying to get it all together and donate it to the Palestinian Museum, but for some reason our email communications got interrupted and I haven't been able to connect with them since.
Yeah, and I appreciate you everything you do in regards to that. But isn't it funny that little fact escaped me for the longest time, and I've been quite interested in that subject. And there you go. The Jerusalem Post was originally the Palestine Post. That's all I've got to say, mate. And have a great show, and talk to you later. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're coming up here on another commercial break, and we have got 2 more calls waiting on the lines. No, 1 more call. Then we're going to close the lines again, and this time I really, really mean it because I got a bunch of news to get through. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take this last phone call, I'm noticing something very interesting on the Fox News channel. All morning long, it was Syria gas attack, Syria gas attack, Syria gas attack. We got to strike, we got to strike, we got to strike. It's been turned off like a switch is thrown. Last couple of hours, it's been all about the raid of Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. We'll be talking about that later in the show. Now they're talking about how Loretta Lynch is pushing back against James Comey. I think somebody realized they're absolutely not getting any traction with this, that everybody assumes this is another U.S. government lie, and now they're stuck with it. So if that's true, then we may see a relatively small response. I mean, they're going to have to do something. They're not going to back off and say, we were only kidding about the gas attack, because they've been embarrassed so many times by these lies. But I think maybe it'll be another cruise missile attack, cause a little bit of damage. I don't think they really want to risk a full-on war with Russia. I certainly hope they don't. I mean, the military-industrial complex wants a Cold War, where the American people are constantly soaked for as much money as possible so the defense contractors can build weapons that they hope will never actually be used. It's a scam. That's what they were doing back in the 50s and 60s, and they want that back. I don't think they really want a hot war. There may be some people who do, and that, of course, is the danger. All right, we're going to take 1 more phone call, and then we're going to close the phone lines again. Mike in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was going to say, if we were to have a world order, whether it's a new world order or whether it's global domination, there's 3 factions. There's Christianity, there's communism, and there's Islam. So Christianity has to go first. And then what you will have is the clash of civilizations between the yellow race, communism, and Islam. So I just thought I'd bounce that off of you because I've heard recently a lot about, a World War III. And that may entail something that has to do with the West, which is predominantly Christian, and I hope that doesn't actually come about. But systematically speaking, I believe the United States is broke and is devoid of any type of its traditional spirituality, namely Christianity. And it just seems like the world is headed toward some type of a global domination of some sort. But what people need to keep in mind is that may not include Christians or the West.
Well,
that's all I had to say.
Those who are pushing for a new world order understand that the friction between the world's major religions is a serious impediment to their unified global population. And so a lot of people have theorized that, like the former Soviet Union, the New World Order will push for atheism. rather than risk having their New World Order torn apart by the same kind of religious discord that almost tore the British Empire apart in the time of Elizabeth.
Right. Right. Do you think communism could be the answer to that?
Well, communism isn't a religion, it's an economic system, and it's rather inappropriate to lump it in with Christianity and Islam. But again, the question is, how do you get the entire world to agree to one religion? It's been thousands and thousands of years. They haven't been able to do it yet. Governments and rulers tolerate religion because it's another form of control over the population. But the influence of religion on people, at least in the Christian countries, is very much on the wane. People are becoming more sophisticated than that. And Islam still has a tendency to breed religious fanatics, especially among the Wahhabists. And so maybe the New World Order will say, okay, we're going to make the world Islam, which certainly seems to be happening right now in the European Union.
Ah, interesting. Very good. Very good point. Thank you for your letting me call, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and the phone lines are closed until further notice. Now, North Korea has indicated that it is ready to discuss the North Korea nuclear program when Kim Jong-un meets with Donald Trump. They're not saying that they're willing to denuclearize, but they're willing to basically talk about the issues. So Kim Jong-un is coming across as being moderate and reasonable, quite the contrast with the image of a raving lunatic that the corporate media has been feeding you. We're still waiting to see what's going to come out of the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in at the Peace House. And I am willing to bet a jar of kimchi they're going to come on out and say, we have a plan for reunification. And that will definitely pull the rug out from underneath the U.S. hostility toward North Korea and the U.S. justification for continuing to garrison South Korea. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And it does look like something major is about to happen in Syria that runs the risk of a direct military confrontation, not only with the government of Syria, but with Russia and with Iran. And I would like to not see this happen, because the danger is, if we mix it up in a new world war, there will come a time when the U.S. government is going to realize they cannot win conventionally, and that's when the nuclear missiles will start flying. And that's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. And we've been talking about America's weapons. After 18, 19 years of war, most of it is worn on out. The stockpiles are drawn down. The new weapons coming out of the military-industrial complex are overpriced junk. And to illustrate this point, there's an article that came out of Russia today, basically quoting Military Times, which is a U.S.-based website dealing with the military, basically saying that U.S. military aircraft mishaps are up nearly 40% over the last 5 years. And it's raising concerns that resources are overextended, aircraft are not being properly maintained, and basically the vast majority of these accidents, approximately 4,000, involve the U.S. military's fleet of manned warplanes. It's bombers, fighter aircraft, cargo aircraft, refuelers, helicopters, and tilt rotors. We know the Osprey's got a really, really bad track record. I think it was about a year and a half ago, we had 2 of the big Sikorsky helicopters that were just on a training flight around the island, vanished off the north coast of Oahu. Still don't know what happened to them. The F-22 is still asphyxiating its pilots above a certain altitude. The list of problems with the F-35 is just endless. You have the Independence-class littoral combat ships, severe corrosion issues. The Freedom-class littoral combat ships, drivetrain problems. They've already decided to scrap those 2 platforms and go back to the drawing board because they couldn't get the modular arming system to work properly. I remember we were watching this puff piece on what wonderful ships they were, and the show was documenting the sea trials for one of these ships. And the last day of the sea trials, they had to run the test tied up to the dock because of the drivetrain issues. The Zumwalt stealth destroyer is not all that stealthy. It, too, has drivetrain problems. And now they've got the Gerald R. Ford, $13 billion supercarrier, and it's got all these new high-tech whiz-bang systems that don't seem to want to work correctly. Apparently, during sea trials following her commissioning, the catapult system kept breaking down, cannot sustain flight operations for the duration of expected air battles. Just keeps breaking on down. There's supposed to be this wonderful synchronized radar system that can see everything in all directions. They can't get that to line up. All kinds of issues. We're not really ready to fight a war, not with these weapons. They look impressive, but as that caller said before, the day of the aircraft carrier is pretty much over. This war is all about smart weapons. It's all about Russia's new wonder weapons, the underwater drone that can just navigate wherever it wants to go. These hypersonic missiles that fly at Mach 10, Mach 15. Our existing defenses cannot get through, cannot deal with them. They're going to get through. I remember back in the 90s, there was this big sting where the Joint Chiefs called in one of the top Navy admirals that was an expert on the aircraft carriers and said, if war with Russia breaks out, what is the life expectancy of our aircraft carriers? And the admiral said, 1 week. 2 weeks if you keep them in port. We're not ready for this. We're going to lose this one. And on the path to loss, it's going to go nuclear. And we should all be very, very concerned about that. Somebody wrote in on email saying they've already called their members of Congress and suggest that everybody else do the same. We've got to scream at these people. Don't do this. Just remember, it doesn't matter where your bunkers are. The Russians know where those bunkers are, and they have nuclear weapons that can penetrate them. Our members of Congress are not going to be safe if things really go nuclear. All right, turning to the domestic politics, and I know I inverted the normal order, but this thing with the obvious false flag in Syria had to be the top story. The House is now considering impeaching Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein for delaying and not providing documents requested by the oversight committees. Apparently, Mark Meadows of the House Republican Freedom Caucus was on Judge Jeanine's show last night on Fox, basically saying it's time to start impeaching these officials for obstructing the oversight function of Congress. And he's absolutely right. The Department of Justice is subordinate to the Congress. Congress operates on the same level of authority as the President and as the Supreme Court. That's the way it was set up. Now, the big story that's come on out now is apparently the FBI has raided the office of Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen. And apparently they're digging out the dirt on this Stormy Daniels affair. And apparently they're doing it because of a referral by the Office of the Special Counsel, Robert Mueller. Now, Robert Mueller was tasked with finding out if there was collusion between Trump and Russia, even though collusion is technically not a crime under U.S. law. He didn't find anything. So now he's out there in the gutter. He's digging in the dirt. He's trying to find something he could use to tarnish Trump with this porn actress. And it's irrelevant, okay? It is irrelevant to the issue of whether the president is doing a good job or not if he had a hot date with a porn star somewhere in his past. Now, Robert Mueller charged Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign manager, for working with the former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych in 2013. Photographs have surfaced showing that Robert Mueller himself was working with Yanukovych in 2013, 6 months before John Brennan, John McCain, Victoria Nuland, and their EU partners led that bloody neo-Nazi coup to overthrow the Yanukovych government and put in Poroshenko. Because Yanukovych did not want to merge with the European Union, he wanted to pivot toward Russia. Now, Sarah Palin, just when you think she's gone, she's back. She's out there indicating she may run for high office again in an interview with radio host Mark Levin. And she said the reason she didn't do very well about the vice president under John McCain was that she was hamstrung by her political consultants. I seem to recall it somewhat differently, but it looks like Sarah Palin wants to throw her hat back in the ring. All right, let's get into the economic news. The U.S. has hit Russia with new sanctions. The Interior Minister is among 38 officials, tycoons, and companies listed. It's just another prod, and it's justified because of Russia's attempt to subvert Western democracies. Well, I'm sorry, but it's the U.S. that's subverting these other countries. Iran in 53, Chile in 73, and on and on and on. Now, there's an article over in Zero Hedge saying the trade war is game on. There's no walking away until something serious happens. And they make a valid point we should all be thinking about. If China is discouraged from buying U.S. products because of this trade war, I'm sorry, I've got it the other way around. If China cannot sell us products because of the tariffs and the trade war, then how are they going to continue to buy U.S. debt? This trade war is literally cutting the U.S. economy's own throat, because right now the U.S. is dependent on China continuing to buy treasury bonds. And China could stop anytime they want. They could dump their treasury bonds over $1 trillion worth with a T. Now, the Chinese press is basically saying it's time for Chinese investors to start dumping U.S. stocks. So this thing is getting more and more tense. Now, I mentioned this a little earlier in the program. Apparently, the Congressional Budget Office has come on out calculating that the U.S. budget deficit will surpass $1 trillion by 2020, 2 years earlier than previously estimated. Now, we're talking about the deficit, not the debt. The deficit is the yearly amount by which the government spends more than it takes on in. So according to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2020, the U.S. government will spend $1 trillion more per year than it's taking in taxes and other revenues. Where are they going to get that other trillion? Oh, they'll just borrow it. And they'll stick your children and grandchildren with those interest payments. Now, Republican Congressman from West Virginia, Alex Mooney, is proposing a bill to redefine the U.S. dollar as a fixed weight of gold. The problem is the U.S. government may not have enough gold to do that. We don't know what's actually in Fort Knox. It's never had a full audit. Back following the Nixon shock, when there were suspicions that maybe Fort Knox didn't have all the gold we were told it did, they had a press conference. They took some reporters into Fort Knox. They opened up the door of one vault and showed a stack of bricks right behind the door. Nobody was allowed to touch them. Nobody was allowed to test them. Nobody was allowed to peek behind to see if there were more gold bars or an empty room. And don't forget, when Germany discovered these gold bars with tungsten cores, some of them carried the hallmarks of Fort Knox. Story coming on out of Investment Watch blog. Silver is finally starting to catch up with gold. There are suspicions that just as the moneyed interests are trying to keep gold prices down, they've been doing it with silver, but it's starting to break loose here. Okay, Nine West has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. More and more retailers are continuing to fall by the wayside. Now, out in California, which is just, I remember California. My family moved there on my 12th birthday, and I lived a significant part of my life there until I left California with my lovely wife, Claire, to move to Washington State, because we were getting death threats over that whole foster thing. But apparently, thousands of people have mistakenly been enrolled in California's Medicaid expansion. And apparently, they signed up an estimated 450,000 people who may not have been eligible for coverage, according to a report by the U.S. Health and Human Services Chief Watchdog. So in this report, the HHS Inspector General estimated California spent $738.2 million on 366,000 expansion beneficiaries who were ineligible. They're not managing the money. They're misspending it. They're wasting it. When they start running out, what do? Oh, we're going to raise taxes. We have to raise taxes. We're out of money. I think giving government more tax money is like handing a bottle of whiskey and the keys to the family car to a bunch of teenage boys. They're just going to go on out and have a lot of fun. Now, as you know, the new big thing is biometric tracking. And apparently down in Mexico, banks are starting to use biometrics to identify their customers. And to nobody's surprise, cyber criminals have been able to break into the banks and get the biometric data, which they can then use to fool the biometric sensors. And apparently cyber theft has just exploded in Mexico. I think we need to go back to cash and carry. Cash in your pocket cannot be hacked here. Now, apparently, top Democrat and business allies invited reporters to a Capitol Hill event to watch illegal immigrants demand amnesty and smear Republicans as racist for denying them amnesty and for denying them U.S. taxpayer-funded benefits. In other words, if you don't give us free stuff, you're racist. Illegal isn't a race. And no, in point of fact, the illegal immigrants do not have any rights in this country because they are not legal citizens. They are not protected by the Constitution. They're not entitled to any rights or privileges that U.S. citizens are entitled to. I saw an online poll someplace where the question was, do you think U.S. citizens should have superior rights to the illegal immigrants? 67% of the people said yes. Now, down in Mexico, their Senate is threatening to stop helping the U.S. War against the drug cartels if Trump deploys troops to the border, which tells you just how corrupted the Mexican government has become by all this drug trafficking. They want to go on sending those illegal drugs into the United States of America. They don't want the National Guard getting in the way. Meanwhile, Stephen King, Representative Stephen King, was on an interview on Sirius XM's Breitbart News, basically came on out and said that what is going on here is the U.S. government is borrowing money from China to buy plane tickets to fly these illegal aliens across America. And I think what is going on should be very obvious. As the illegals come across the border, they are simply grabbed and they're being sent to House districts that are just slightly red to try and shift them to blue. They're part of this plan by the Democrats to recapture the Congress this November, unless it is stopped. And it's certainly a good thing that Trump signed that executive order ending catch and release. And it's now official from the Department of Justice. Any immigrant caught entering the U.S. illegally will be thrown in jail. Now, one of the common arguments that we get from the liberals is, you know, what would happen if all the illegal aliens vacated America? Oh, we need to remember those illegals, they pay rent, they're buying groceries, they buy clothes. What happens to your economy if these 20 million people go away? And by the way, that's a new estimate for how many illegals are inside this country. Well, you have to ask, where are they getting the money? Well, if they're getting it from welfare, then it's a push. So let's look. What would happen if the illegals all left the United States of America? In California, if 3.5 million illegal aliens moved back to Mexico, it would leave an extra $10.2 billion to spend on overloaded school systems, bankrupt hospitals, and overrun prisons. It would certainly leave the highways cleaner, safer, and less congested. And everybody would be able to understand each other because the language of the United States is, in fact, English. If all the illegal immigrants went back to Mexico, it means 12,000 gang members would vanish out of the city of Denver alone. Colorado would save more than $20 million in prison costs and the terror that these alien criminals set upon local citizens. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more on this topic after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the pro-immigrant, pro-open borders arguments is that if all the illegals were to leave the country at once, that it would be a disaster because they're a vibrant part of our economy. They buy things, they pay rent, and the numbers actually work out the other way. And we're talking about what would really be the economic impact if all the illegals were to leave the United States at once. The Denver public schools would not suffer a 67% dropout or flunk rate because thousands of illegal alien students speaking 41 different languages would no longer be there. Denver's 4% unemployment rate would vanish as our working poor would gain jobs at a living wage. In Chicago, Illinois, 2.1 million illegals would free up hospitals, schools, prisons, and highways for a safer, cleaner, more crime-free experience. If 20 million illegal aliens returned home, the U.S. economy would return to the rule of law. Employers would hire legal American citizens at a living wage. Everyone would be paying their fair share of taxes because they wouldn't be working off the books. Apparently, there was an ICE raid at a meat packing plant. 97 illegals working there. None of them are paying any taxes whatsoever. No more, let's see, again, no more confusion in schools that are having to contend with all these languages. One of the real issues that we have with the current illegal immigrants is they come on in demanding we learn their language. Now, when Claire and I lived in Southern California, this was already becoming an issue, even among the legal immigrants. They didn't feel that they should come to the United States and have to learn English. And they were really starting to push for everybody to learn Spanish to deal with them, which was arrogant in the extreme. This gets on back to what Teddy Roosevelt said. If you want to come to the United States, you're welcome. Just understand this is the United States of America. We have our laws which must be complied with. We have one language, which is English, and we have one loyalty, and that is to the United States of America. If all the illegal immigrants were to go back to Mexico, that would mean 500,000 illegal criminal alien inmates would no longer have to be supported at a cost of more than $1.6 billion annually. That includes 15,000 MS-13 gang members who distribute $130 billion in drugs annually. In cities like Los Angeles, 20,000 members of the 18th Street Gang would vanish from our nation. No more Mexican forgery gangs for ID theft from Americans. No more foreign rapists or child molesters. The fact of the matter is this open borders agenda is draining our country at a time when we cannot afford it. And the people who are in favor of open borders, who think a one world government is going to be great, they don't see the damage they're causing to the United States or to Europe, or they simply don't care. No sacrifice by other people is too great for our dream of a one world government and a new world order. All right, we're going to take another break for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. Fox News is just now finishing up a segment on how today is International Unicorn Day. And, of course, now it's the top of the hour. They're back to President Trump is meeting with the military leaders. And regardless of how this comes out, whether it's a symbolic strike or a full-on war, the U.S. government has destroyed its credibility with the American people and with the rest of the international community because nobody is buying this, this false flag gas attack. There's just no evidence for it. And especially coming hard on the heels of Britain's embarrassment over the Skripal case, for which there was no evidence, it's becoming very, very obvious that the U.S. government has a credibility problem of immense proportions. So does the corporate media. And they did it to themselves, so I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. But we, the American people, now is the time where we have to be willing to stand up and just scream, you are lying to us, and I'm not listening to you anymore. And it almost seems like the attitude of the government is, well, we don't care if you believe us or not. This is our policy, and this is what we're going to do, and yet you can't do anything about it because the elections are under our control. And that's a very bad place to be in. And I can understand the anger of a lot of people out there. Some of the people calling into the show, a lot of the emails I'm receiving. And we are approaching a breaking point. And I'm very, very concerned about what might happen here. Now, getting on back to immigration, as you know, Donald Trump signed an executive order to send the National Guard down to our southern border with Mexico to basically deter illegals from coming across, although as of last report, the National Guard will not be armed and they're not technically allowed to do immigrations and customs enforcement. Apparently, Texas and Arizona have already sent their National Guard down to the borders with somewhat different instructions, and the liberals are just up in arms about that. Up in Oregon, Governor Kate Brown basically refused Donald Trump's order, and as the state's governor, she has the legal right to do so, and say, I'm keeping our National Guard in Oregon. You're not going to use them to protect the U.S. border. Here's where it gets interesting. Only days before that she announced she would not send Oregon's National Guard to the southern border, she accepted a large donation from George Soros. So once again, it's George Soros who's pushing this insanity on the planet. Getting on over to Great Britain, financial experts are starting to look at what will be the real impact of the Brexit. And as we've mentioned before on this show many times, the bulk of the load for keeping the EU propped up is going to fall on Germany. And the people of Germany are not happy about that. They're certainly not happy about what the refugee crisis has done to their country. So tensions are building over there. Turkey's being accused of allowing migrants to surge into Europe as Europol tracks 65,000 people smugglers. And why this is an issue is because the European Union paid Turkey some 3 billion euros to stem the influx. But while there was a brief drop, it's back up to full bore again. And the EU is concerned that Erdogan is just weaponizing the refugees. Now, over in Brussels, there's a great wailing and gnashing of teeth and tearing of hair because down in Hungary, Viktor Orban has won the Hungary elections in a landslide victory. And of course, he has been campaigning on this issue of closing the Hungarian borders, sending the refugees back to their home, and straining to break away from the European Union. Brussels wanted him defeated. They put a lot of effort and money into defeating him. It was a landslide victory. So I hope Victor is wearing his Kevlar because I have a feeling we're coming up on the point where Eurosceptic politicians may actually be at risk of losing their lives. Now, over in Israel, as you know, there's been this situation going back and forth about the African refugees pouring into Israel. A lot of them were Ethiopian Jews who are allowed to go to Israel because of the right of return law. Anybody, anywhere on earth who claims to be Jewish has an automatic right to move to Israel and become a citizen. But the people of Israel are getting a little bit upset about the number of black people in their country. And so there was a plan to deport them all. And then Netanyahu worked out this deal with the UN where 16,000 of the Africans were going to remain in Israel and the rest were going to be deported to the European Union rather than back to Africa. And apparently here in the United States, Israel supporters are demanding that Israel continue that plan. Take all those African migrants and send them to Europe. One has to wonder why. Over in Sadiq Khan's London, things are really out of control. The lead surgeon at the London hospital is saying it resembles a war zone. More people are being killed. And he says this idea of these kind of assaults used to be something that happened very rarely. Now it's an everyday event. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And apparently murders in Great Britain are skyrocketing as the police fail to protect the defenseless population. Now remember, the population is defenseless by design. Great Britain has strict gun control. And basically, by 1996, all guns, including handguns, were banned in Great Britain. You can technically own a firearm if you are a member of a shooting club, but the gun has to be kept at the club. When you are in your home, you have nothing. 2006, the British government even banned toy guns to try and condition children to not think about guns and violence. And so now only the criminals have guns. A lot of these murders are gunshots. The criminals have the guns, the law-abiding do not. Also, there's been a lot of stabbings. And Sadiq Khan has now declared a new knife control policy. Next, it'll be forks, then teaspoons. And of course, the fact that there are so many stabbings completely crushes the idea that guns cause the violence. No, if the guns are banned, those predisposed to violence will in fact use other things, like knives. And so now Sadiq Khan is going to ban non-kitchen knives, which means, again, the criminals will be armed and the law-abiding will not be. Getting on back to the YouTube shooter, article that came on out of Reason.com, looking at this lady's videos, it's obvious she had issues. And looking at her videos, they're cringy, they're disturbing. I want to know if this lady was on prescription antidepressants. And by the way, the videos are all being taken down, especially the one of her doing squats in front of the flag of Israel. So why has the YouTube shooting sort of gone away from the corporate media, which normally loves to parade mass shootings to support the gun grab? Well, in this case, the shooter wasn't a white male. And one of the big issues for the gun grabber agenda is to try and claim that white males are at the top of the oppressors list, that they're the dangerous ones. They should be disarmed. Nope. She was an Iranian woman. There were no children involved, and without children, you can't tug at the heartstrings of a gullible American populace. And finally, of course, she didn't use an AR-15. It was just a handgun. And, you know, who cares about that? We're after those AR-15s. We've got to disarm the American people so they'll do what we tell them to do. But according to the FBI, only 3% of gun homicides were committed with any kind of rifle in 2016. AR-15s are not a weapon of choice for criminals. They're the starring role in these false flag shooting incidents because that is the weapon the government wants to take away from us so that we cannot stand up to them, especially as they come to herd our children off to World War III. Now, over at Woodland Park High School, they had a student walkout in support of the Second Amendment. And I'll bet you did not see that on the corporate media, did you? Over in Seattle, police are taking advantage of the new extreme risk law where police are confiscating firearms from residents based solely on somebody saying, I think this person might be a danger. Apparently over in Tennessee, a 7th grader made a joke about guns and was charged with a felony. This is definitely overkill. But the idea is to get everybody to stop thinking about guns. Don't even visualize a gun. Don't think about guns at all. Here's a very, very dangerous Supreme Court decision that has come on down. And we all know how the police have just been on a killing spree of innocent Americans, law-abiding Americans, and everybody's saying we need to do something about this, and that has now been rendered impossible by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has ruled police can kill non-threatening people as long as the police say they were scared. And this case originated from a police shooting in Tucson, Arizona in 2010. This police corporal, Andrew Casella, heard a report over police radio about a woman using a kitchen knife to hack a tree and acting erratically. And he showed up, and there was the woman apparently just standing there holding the knife, and they shot her. And he said the shooting was justified because he was afraid for his life and safety, even though there was a chain link fence between them. And that is a very, very dangerous Supreme Court decision. It actually reminds me, believe it or not, of this segment off of South Park, where these people are out there hunting, and even though hunting is illegal, every time they see an animal, they scream, "It's coming right for us," and then they shoot it. Because apparently the exception to the no hunting law is that you can shoot an animal that's directly attacking you. Life imitates art. We're now in the same place. The police can shoot anybody and say, "Oh, I was afraid of them." It's not really very good for the image of the police to be afraid of so many people. Story coming out of IntelliHub. The real goal of eliminating the Second Amendment is to obliterate the First Amendment and enslave us all in a web of propaganda. And they're already trying to do that. They're at war with the independent media. Because it's the independent media that stands up and says, "Hey, wait a minute, that so-called gas attack in Syria looks like a false flag. You're being lied and tricked into yet another war." Corporate media won't tell you that. That's not their job. Their job is to sell you that war. Their job is to sell you a new car. Their job is to sell you a new tax or a new policy or a new president, which they failed to do in 2016. They were wholly on board with the Hillary Clinton campaign. And this is even scarier. This is Rush Limbaugh. And apparently Rush Limbaugh had a caller into his show who was a teacher in Los Angeles. And basically, the teacher was saying that she was told not to teach the U.S. Constitution in social studies because the Constitution contradicted the state-approved textbook too much. Now, remember, we were talking about this back in relation to Common Core, where Common Core is teaching a very perverted version of the Bill of Rights to young people. So people are coming out of Common Core education with a very distorted idea of what the Bill of Rights actually says. This is brainwashing, plain and simple. This is exactly what the Soviet Union used to do to their children. And now it's happening right here in our country. Now, over at Cedar Creek Intermediate School, there's a teacher 6th grade, Julie Marburger, and dealing with the classroom violence and the inattentiveness and the poor academic performance. And she is saying the problem is primarily parents who coddle and enable their kids. There's no discipline, there's no teaching of values, and it's not entirely the parents' fault because of all these child protective laws that have been passed that say that if you spank your child, you could be arrested for child abuse. You could have your child taken away. What a mess they have made of this country. Now, last week there was a story involving the first transgender weightlifter, and its name was Laurel Hubbard. This is a man transitioning to a woman, has a 25% physical advantage over all the other competitors at the Commonwealth Games because of her previous male life. She was allowed to compete. And they're basically saying, Otago University professor of physiology, Professor Alan Heather, said, a man transitioning to a female has physiological advantages that they take into their new female life. So this man becoming a woman went in there, but the story actually has a happy ending because this man turning into a woman was already winning the weightlifting championship when it decided to try for a new world record and basically suffered a massive injury to the elbow. And so one of the real biological women won the gold medal. And I think that's a good outcome. This idea of having transgender men who think they're women, compete against women, that is simply not fair. It makes a mockery of female athletics. It's not fair to all those women to allow men to compete against them. It simply isn't. Now, getting on back to billionaire George Soros, remember the Ferguson demonstrations? Apparently, Soros spent $33 million bankrolling the Ferguson demonstrators to create an echo chamber and drive national protests. In other words, all of this was bought and paid for. It wasn't a real, genuine grassroots protest. It was a rent-a-mob or rent-a-ruckus. Now, Great Britain, right after the Skripal fiasco, has a new embarrassment on their hands. Apparently, the British government has said for the first time that members of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is suspected to be behind the Manchester bombing, were likely among those the British government supported in Libya to topple Muammar Gaddafi. This is called getting hoist on your own petard. And everybody's asking, what will be the blowback for the British government after this revelation that the terrorists who bombed Manchester were in the employ of the British government, at least back during the time of Gaddafi, and maybe to the current situation? Remember, governments love things like bombings. It scares the people. It allows the government to exert more authority. Now, over in South Korea, a court has sentenced their former president, Gun Hyo, to 24 years in prison after he was found guilty of corruption. We need a little of that here in the United States of America. Interestingly enough, they haven't been able to get her in prison because she's surrounded by thousands of her followers, and there's a concern that rioting and street warfare could break out. Now, as you know, over the last couple of years, there has been a disturbing pattern of biological researchers, holistic doctors, various other people with inside information on the medical industrial complex dying under questionable circumstances. So not too long ago, actually 7 weeks ago, there was this employee for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention who went missing. His name was Timothy Cunningham. He left work early. He said he wasn't feeling well, and he went home and just apparently disappeared. They finally found his body partially submerged in water and mud on the west bank of the Chattahoochee River in northwest Atlanta. And they're out there saying there's no sign of foul play. Well, I would call that into question because his wallet and his keys and his glasses and his cell phone were still in the house. And apparently Cunningham had told his neighbor that the neighbor's wife should delete Cunningham's phone number from her cell phone. So was this guy a potential whistleblower? We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, welcome back to our show here. And the latest word we're getting from Syria is apparently the USS Donald Cook is claiming that Russian fighter jets are harassing it, which means they're just flying around taking a look. Now remember, the Donald Cook was the ship that was absolutely shut down by Russia's electronic warfare aircraft in the Black Sea. And so my guess is that what Russia is planning on doing in the face of a cruise missile launch is they're going to shut down both those ships. This is getting really, really serious. All right, let's take a phone call. Roxanne in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I just want to go completely the opposite way and say, what if he's going to bring them all home, get them all out of there? What if? Well, everybody's so, I don't know, freaked out. Well, what if is all I have to say, and that's it. Thank you.
Well, obviously, when Donald Trump announced he wanted to get out of Syria because he was just kind of sick and tired of dealing with the whole mess, and all of his military generals came on and said, you can't do that. Netanyahu called him up and screamed at him, and Trump basically caved on in. No, the Syrian troops are not coming home. They're going to ramp up this war. And they're doing it, first of all, because the U.S. can't afford to lose any of these wars. When Trump talked about bringing the troops out, even CNN came on out and said, well, this means Russia and Syria have won. And the U.S. has built up this war momentum with all these invasions and regime changes over the last 19 years. They've built up this momentum and this reputation of invincibility. And the first time the U.S. is seen to lose one of these wars, it's all over. The whole thing is going to fall apart. And that's why I think that Russia, if the U.S. does attack Damascus, which seems to be in the offing, I think Russia is going to respond with force to make it clear that, no, the U.S. has, in fact, lost in Syria. And it's very dangerous. It's very risky. But I think that's the way it's going to go. The time for half measures is over. Everybody understands this story about yet another chemical weapon attack by Assad on women and children is just a big steaming pile of USDA choice bovine excrement. And nobody should believe this. And in fact, I'm going to call on Rivero's Rangers to make a point of talking about this with everybody that you know and point out how ridiculous the story is. Assad was on the verge of winning, was on the verge of getting the U.S. out of Syria. The very last thing he would do is a chemical weapons attack that would justify the U.S. coming back on in. It just really doesn't make any sense. Assad gains nothing from this. Britain gets to move past the Skripal case. Israel gets to move past the Passover massacre. Everybody benefits from this except Assad, and that's what tells us he had nothing to do with this, if it even happened at all. We're not even sure anything really happened. Nobody can find any evidence. It's just this incredible rush to judgment. Oh, there's been a gas attack. The war is on. I have never been so ashamed of this government in my entire life. They're not even trying to be clever about the propaganda anymore. All right, let's get on into the area of computers. A lot of stuff going on. Apparently, Mark Zuckerberg is losing support from his fellow Silicon Valley tech elite. Facebook is being described as the new cigarettes. Toxic, dangerous, and normally when any Silicon Valley firm gets attacked, the others will leap on board to support them. It's not happening in this case. One of the reasons that Facebook's brand has been damaged is that apparently they were caught trying to access private medical records and match it to the user profiles. Well, Facebook has now said they're not going to do that. They're backing off on that. But yeah, a lot of people are very upset. We understand that when we post things to the internet, that it's no longer private. But in this case, they were going on out to try and access our private medical records and link it to the user profiles for whatever purpose. They were going to do that, sell it to marketing people so you'd get ads for relevant drugs on your mailbox. But it really is a tremendous abuse of the system. Okay, let's go back to the phones. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, great show as usual. I called in on Saturday a few weeks ago, and I had posed a question to the host there. I'd like to pose it to you. I think the greatest threat to peace on earth, I used to think it was this Khazarian cartel that runs the banks, but I'm not sure it's not the Christian Zionists. And I think that Islamic terrorism is as sick as that is a third place. What is worse for world peace? Do you think it's the Christian Zionist puppets or these Khazarian oligarchs that rule the world? I'm not sure.
As you say, the Christian Zionists are puppets. They're useful idiots, as Stalin would say. Definitely the bankers are calling the shots here. They love a war. War plunges the world into debt for another 100 years. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, Jeff. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call from Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I sent you an email. So I like to send out emails periodically, and what I sent you was a website called Trading Economics. I don't know whether you've heard of it or not.
Yes.
But yeah. So basically, you can look up, some very interesting data about countries all over the world. There's a search bar. I usually just type in Germany's money supply, China's money supply, blah, blah, blah. I sent you the one on the U.S., and you were talking about the debt that, bonds that China holds. So it's over $1 trillion U.S., And you know what, Mike? I don't see a problem with them unwinding that. The Federal Reserve will just buy it up.
Yeah, but they'll print new money. They'll create new money that's going to put inflationary pressure.
Yes, they will.
Yeah, and
but they'll export that. They'll export that inflationary pressure because the U.S. still has the world's reserve currency.
No, they don't anymore. Other countries are starting to move away from the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. A lot of them now have what they call baskets of different currencies, and more countries are basically signing treaties to trade between their countries in their indigenous currencies. The days when the U.S. dollar reigns supreme are already over. It's still a major player out there, but it's only a matter of time before other countries are going to say, we're delinking from the dollar. We can't afford to take the chance that it's going to collapse, because that's what the inflationary pressure is going to do. If China dumps those treasuries and the Federal Reserve creates the instant money out of thin air to buy those treasuries back, that is going to make the dollar worth less and less. And it's going to be seen as untrustworthy when compared with other stable currencies like the ruble and the yuan.
Okay, Mike. So I sent you that website for a reason. It shows that the Federal Reserve is holding, roughly $4.5 trillion on its balance sheet, and the private banks are sitting at around $16.5 trillion. If you go to other countries, for instance, Canada, our balance sheet, Canada's central bank balance sheet, is very small, but the private banks are holding over $5.5 trillion on their balance sheet. So if you translate that into 10 times the size of this economy, which is your economy, the United States, that's over $50 trillion.
Yes.
That the private banks are holding as a balance sheet. In your country, it's 16. So honestly, who's the real banana republic here, the United States or Canada? It's a joke. What I mean?
It is. Now, I don't know.
Holy crap.
Now, hang on. You're forgetting one thing, though, and that is that Canada's reserve requirements for their banks are much more stringent than the United States. And we have seen the reserve requirements get shaved back and shaved back and shaved back. The idea being, under this fractional banking system, that the banks were required to have cash on hand of a certain percentage of total outstanding loans. And that margin has been shaved back, and that's why the U.S. Cash on hand in these banks is so much less. They're required to keep less than the equivalent banks in Canada.
Yeah, okay. But so if we look at another thing, for instance, private debt as a percentage of GDP, your country's at 200%, Canada's at 266.
Both of our countries are in a mess.
The most indebted nation on the face of the planet.
Well, all the countries are pretty much in an economic mess because of private central banking. There are no countries that are debt-free and prosperous because it's not designed to be that way.
No, it's not. And what makes it even funnier is if you look at it as a whole, the world, we all owe it to each other. It's a fantasy.
It is.
Built on, it's basically, well, if you do this, then you can have that. It's just an absolute fantasy. So, anyway, that's a great website. I love it. I punch in, a lot of different countries to try and figure out, how the world's really operating. And, Russia is looking pretty good with their debt levels.
That's because Putin took direct control of their central bank. It's still privately owned, but it's now being managed by the Russian government so that the Russian public currency is managed as a public utility. And by the way, it was when Putin did that he went right to the top of the U.S. does not get a Christmas card list.
Yeah, and got kicked out of the G8.
Yes.
Which would happen to any other country that pulled such a stunt.
Yes.
There's always the Comer report, right? Galandi's suing, on the behalf of people of Canada, the central bank. It's never going to go anywhere.
No.
Because even if the government tried to pull that crap, we'd be out of the G7. We'd be ostracized. We'd be just like Russia.
Well,
right?
it's all going to come apart. They can't keep this facade up. When you're talking about trillion-dollar deficits by 2020, and we don't really know what the U.S. government debt is. We're being told it's around $21 trillion, but that does not include unfunded mandates. Something's going to break at some point. We'll be down in Zimbabwe territory, walking around with paper notes in our pocket that say $100 trillion on them, and at that point, the U.S. dollar will be worthless, and nobody will want to use it for trade.
Yeah, it's not good. But anyway, you have a great show, Mike. Like you were just on fire. It was great. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Let's switch over to James in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, as far as the impending attack on Syria, I think, well, I have 2 points. The impending attack on Syria, I think all you have to do to understand why Trump is defecating on his base is look at the genotype of his kids and his future grandkids. Number 2, the gas attack. Apparently, it was a simple matter of mistranslation, semantics, things involving the difference between translation and transliteration. Reuters is just coming out. Apparently the official Syrian War Relief Agency mistakenly sent to Duma a shipping container full of canned refried beans. So the poison gas thing was. I saw a little bit of humor in the wake of survival pressure was a good thing. So
yeah,
anyway,
I think you're right.
That's all I got for you. I got to finish getting drunk after today's news.
Yeah, I heard you on that one. Unfortunately, I can't follow suit because I have to do Jim Goddard's show, and then I got to take Claire over to the big box store and stock up on storable food in advance of the war. All right.
There's always tomorrow.
Yeah, there's always tomorrow. All right, James, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here. Apparently, YouTube could be fined for billions of dollars for illegally collecting data on children under 13. Apparently, there is a law saying that you can't do that. There's a bill called the U.S. Children's Online Privacy Protection Act that says that you're not allowed to collect personal data on people under age 13. And if this complaint is upheld, YouTube could be fined billions of dollars. On the other hand, if YouTube continues to cooperate with the government to suppress certain videos, I'm sure that there'll be a very affordable out-of-court settlement. That's how these things work here. Out in California, the same Democrat who authored the law that eliminated non-medical vaccine exemptions is at it again. State Senator Richard Pan, 52-year-old pediatrician and Harvard graduate from the Sacramento area, has introduced Senate Bill 1424, which states in part, this bill would require any person who operates a social media as defined internet website with a physical presence in California to develop a strategic plan to verify news stories shared on its website. The bill would require the plan to include, among other things, a plan to mitigate the spread of false information through news stories, the utilization of state-approved fact checkers to verify news stories, providing outreach to social media users, and placing a warning on a news story containing false information. In other words, censorship. You want to put a warning label on news saying it's false news. Let's start with all this coverage about this Syrian false flag. Let's start with Fox News. Fox News just came on out and said their polling is showing 63% of Americans favor an attack on Syria following the gas attack. I don't believe that. I absolutely find that unbelievable. And the thing about propaganda, if it isn't believable, it's not going to work. And what Fox News is trying to do is rely on the herd instinct of the sheeple. If we tell them that the vast majority of their friends and neighbors favor this attack, well, they'll just stop bleeding and they'll go along with it. No way in the dark regions. Now, PayPal has ended their donations to an animal rescue facility in Syria over the sanctions. But meanwhile, of course, our tax money is still funding the Syrian terrorists. Funny how nobody seems to sanction them. Story coming on out of NBC. Apparently, hackers are starting to attack 911 call centers. And apparently it is so bad that first responders are having to go back to paper and pencil to track the calls and what they're doing. Apparently these are ransomware attacks. And apparently in Henry County, Tennessee, the hackers shut down the center's dispatch system and demanded more than $2,000 in Bitcoin to turn it back on. And apparently Henry County basically refused. And they're using paper and pencil while they rebuild the system. And I think that's a good thing to stand up to the hackers. The problem is if anybody gets lost, if anybody dies because they weren't gotten to in time, or they weren't gotten to at all, then those hackers need to be tracked down and charged with manslaughter. And again, where is the NSA in all of this? We were told that all the vast sums of money going into the NSA was so that the NSA could protect our IT infrastructure. Where the heck are they? Has anybody seen the NSA actually do anything? Or are they just sitting in those data centers full of stolen amateur porn and abusing themselves all day long? Now, apparently over in Europe, in the Netherlands, hackers have taken over this NATO bunker. It's been abandoned. And they've turned it into a cyber warfare center with which they've gone after the organization's Spam House. Now, Spam House, for those of you who don't know, is a website that basically identifies and tracks servers guilty of sending spam all over the world. And you can download that data and add it to your firewall rules so that your machine cannot be used to forward spam, or your machine will not accept spam from these other sites. And obviously the spammers don't like that. And because spamming is now big business, apparently they're out there trying to shut Spam House down with massive denial of service attacks. The internet has become weaponized. It's a battlefield. Now, one of the latest developments for these gaming boxes, and I'm coming here from an area less than well informed because I don't play computer games. Other than flight simulators, I don't play computer games. But apparently there is an issue where people, along with playing the games over the internet, are also able to talk with each other. And apparently this mother in London was sitting on the sofa next to her son Tyler as he was playing this game Fortnite, and apparently they were using the TV speakers rather than the headphones, and she heard this unidentified man basically propositioning her son with highly suggestive talk. So you may want to think about having your kids going back to just single-player games, because the pervs are taking over the internet along with the propagandists. Actually, you should limit the computer games anyway. Kids are becoming too dependent. They're becoming addicted to the electronics, and they need to basically get on out to that real world again. Anyway, it is still snowing, even though it's April. Kansas City is getting more snow. They're expecting even more. Washington State's winter has not really left. They still have snow. There were flurries over the city of Seattle and the surrounding suburbs. And of course, there's still snow up in the high mountain passes. Story coming out of the New Jersey Herald. The spring snowstorms aren't over just yet. And apparently the White Sox home opener had to deal with snow. There's concern that the Boston Marathon may be disrupted by the snow. Apparently 18 inches of, here's an interesting story. This came out of YDR.com, and it's talking about snow in April. Yes, but 18 inches fell in 1894 in central Pennsylvania. And this is the new spin we're getting from the carbon Nazis. Hey, snow in April is no big deal. It's happened before. It happened back in the 1800s. You know, it's no reason to doubt human-caused global warming. But you need to remember, back when climate disruption was still being called human-caused global warming, the claim was that snowfalls were a thing of the past. So yes, it is significant that there is snow in April. It is significant that the much ballyhooed claim that global warming would lead to no more snow was another outright lie. It's a scam. How many more times do you have to be lied to before you're ready to stand up and say, you are lying and I am not listening to you any longer? Lies on the corporate media, lies on the corporate media commercials, lies on the pharmaceutical commercials, lies coming from the White House Situation Room, lies coming from Congress. We live in a world of lies. We, the people of the United States of America, are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and we need to acknowledge and understand that. Okay, apparently over in Europe, over in Italy, there is concern that Mount Vesuvius is showing signs of activity. It's a big volcano. It's the one that buried Pompeii. And if it erupts again, it's going to be a major, major problem. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And Breitbart is now reporting on this has just gone completely ridiculous. Okay, because it doesn't matter how much hormones therapy you have, how much surgery you've had, in your DNA, you are still male. And that DNA gives you physiological advantages. It is simply not fair to the women who are competing as women. They're destroying the legitimacy of sports. It's no longer athletes out there being athletic. It's chemistry and it's surgery. It's a joke. It really is here. Now, I want to leave the show off today. I want to go back and recap what's going on in Syria. Over the weekend, there was a claim that there's been a chemical weapons attack in Syria. Russian chemical weapons experts are not able to find any evidence it actually happened. Red Crescent isn't reporting it. Red Cross isn't reporting it. The local hospitals are saying they have not received any patients exposed to chemical weapons. The only source for this claim is the white helmets, which have been caught fabricating evidence of Assad's chemical weapons attacks in the past. The story simply doesn't make any sense. Assad has all but won this war. There's no reason for him to do the one thing that would allow the United States to go back into Syria and attack him, which looks like it's going to happen. And my guess is they're probably going to go right for Assad himself. They're going to attack Damascus. And again, Assad gains nothing from this. And I need all of you to go on out and just talk this up with everybody and remind them about how we were lied to about Saddam's nuclear weapons and how the last two times the U.S. tried to claim Assad was gassing his own people, it turned out to be bogus. You need to remind them that only a month ago, Syrians and Russian experts were saying they had intelligence that there was going to be a false flag chemical attack to justify a renewed U.S. aggression in Syria. And it's happening. And this is very, very dangerous because Russia has already pledged to respond if the U.S. attacks Syria again. So we're really right on the edge here. And this could spiral totally out of control. When you have people like John Bolton as the National Security Advisor, this guy is just itching to hit that red button. Remember what Paul Craig Roberts was saying a few months ago. There are people in Washington, D.C. who are openly talking about just hauling on off and launching a nuclear attack against Russia. And Russia would not wait for those missiles to hit. They would hit their launchers and send them on back. And if all of the U.S. deployable nuclear weapons are detonated and all of the Russia's deployable nuclear weapons are detonated, that's it for life on Earth. All right, there's the music. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's going to follow up on more about this obvious false flag and this rush to war. We have got to just scream to the world, we the American people do not support the actions of the United States government. The U.S. government has gone rogue. They are a threat to the world. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.